The sun blazed over the Andes as two armies faced each other on the battlefield. The air was thick with tension, the cries of warriors ringing through the valley. At the heart of the conflict stood two brothers, once united by blood, now torn apart by ambition. One claimed the right to rule as heir to their father, the mighty Sapa Inca Huayna Capac. The other, younger but no less determined, refused to bow. This was no ordinary dispute. It was a war that would decide the fate of an empire. The Inca Empire, vast and powerful, stretched from modern-day Colombia to Chile. It was a land of grand cities, intricate roads, and disciplined armies. But beneath its golden surface, a storm had been brewing. When Huayna Capac died suddenly, leaving no clear successor, the empire was thrust into chaos. His sons, Huáscar and Atahualpa, each believed they had the right to rule. Their struggle would not only shape the future of the Incas, but also set the stage for a far greater upheaval, one that would bring the mighty empire to its knees. This was not just a battle for a throne. It was a test of loyalty, of tradition, and of the very foundations of Inca rule. The brothers' war would leave scars on the land and its people, scars that would prove easy for a new, foreign force to exploit. What followed would change history forever. The Inca Empire did not begin as a vast dominion. Long before the golden age of the Sapa Inca, the people of Cusco were just one of many small groups in the Andes. They lived in the highlands, farming terraced fields and building stone structures that blended with the rugged landscape. For centuries, they remained a minor power among the many cultures of the region, until a series of bold rulers changed their fate. The empire's expansion began in earnest under Pachacuti, a ruler whose vision transformed the Inca from a local kingdom into a dominant force. He reorganized the government, built roads that connected distant lands, and launched military campaigns that brought new territories under Inca control. His son, Tupac Yupanqui, continued the conquests, pushing the empire's borders even further. By the time Huayna Capac took the throne, the Inca ruled a vast domain, stretching from Ecuador to central Chile. At the heart of this empire was the Sapa Inca, the divine ruler believed to be a descendant of the sun god Inti. His word was law, his will absolute. The empire was divided into 4 great provinces, each governed by nobles loyal to the throne. A network of roads, bridges, and messengers allowed the central government to maintain control over distant lands. Tribute flowed into Cusco, and the capital became a center of wealth, culture, and religious power. Yet, for all its strength, the empire was built on a fragile foundation. The system of rule depended on a clear line of succession, and when Huayna Capac died without naming a successor, that foundation began to crack. The empire had grown too large, too fast, and without a strong ruler to hold it together, divisions began to surface. The question of who would inherit the throne was not just a matter of family rivalry. It was a crisis that threatened the stability of the entire realm. The death of Huayna Capac marked the beginning of the end for the unified Inca Empire. The ruler had spent his life expanding the empire's reach, bringing new lands under Inca control and solidifying his authority. But when he fell ill and died suddenly, along with his chosen heir, Ninon Cuyuchi, the empire was left without a clear successor. Rumors spread that an illness, possibly smallpox, brought by European explorers, had taken the emperor's life, though some believed poison was involved. Whatever the cause, his death left a power vacuum that his sons were quick to exploit. Huayna Capac had not named a single heir before his death. Instead, he had divided his empire between his 2 most prominent sons. Huáscar, the eldest, was the son of Coyacusirimai, a noblewoman of royal lineage, which gave him a strong claim to the throne. He was raised in Cusco, the sacred heart of the empire, where he was trained in the traditions of Inca rule. His mother's noble status made him the natural choice for the Cusco elite, who saw him as the rightful heir. Atahualpa, on the other hand, was born to a woman from the northern province of Quito. Though he was Huayna Capac's son, his mother was not of royal blood, which weakened his claim in the eyes of the Cusco nobility. However, he had spent much of his life in the north, where he had gained the support of powerful generals and regional leaders. His father had granted him control of Quito, a prosperous and strategically important region, giving him access to wealth and military strength. As news of Huayna Capac's death spread, both brothers laid claim to the throne. Huáscar declared himself the rightful ruler, basing his legitimacy on his noble birth and upbringing in Cusco. Atahualpa, emboldened by his position in the north, refused to bow. The empire, once held together by the will of a single ruler, now stood on the brink of civil war.
With no clear heir to the throne, the empire's nobles and military leaders quickly took sides. Huáscar, secure in Cusco, surrounded himself with advisors from the royal court. His closest confidant was his brother Atac, a general who commanded the loyalty of the Cusco garrison. Another key figure was Quisquis, a seasoned commander who had served under Huayna Capac and now pledged his allegiance to Huáscar. These men formed the backbone of Huáscar's faction, determined to uphold tradition and ensure that the rightful heir ruled from the sacred capital. Atahualpa, however, was not without powerful allies. His most trusted general was Chalcuchimac, a veteran warrior who had fought alongside Huayna Capac in numerous campaigns. Chalcuchimac, along with another formidable commander, Quisquis, helped Atahualpa consolidate his power in the north. These generals had built their careers in the frontier provinces, where they had gained the loyalty of soldiers and local leaders. Their support gave Atahualpa a strong military foundation, allowing him to challenge Huáscar's claim. Beyond the military, the political landscape was equally divided. Many in Cusco viewed Huáscar as the rightful ruler, given his noble lineage and upbringing in the imperial court. However, in the northern provinces, particularly in Quito, Atahualpa's rule was widely accepted. His father had granted him authority over these lands, and his time there had earned him the loyalty of regional governors and warriors. Some saw him as a ruler more suited to governing the empire's expanding frontiers, while others feared that Huáscar's rule would favor the old elite at the expense of the provinces. As tensions mounted, both brothers began to take decisive actions. Huáscar moved swiftly to assert his authority, sending envoys to demand loyalty from the northern provinces. Atahualpa, unwilling to submit, gathered his forces and prepared for war. The empire, once united under a single ruler, now stood on the brink of a brutal civil conflict. The first true battle of the succession crisis erupted when Huáscar, determined to assert his authority, sent a force to reclaim the northern provinces under Atahualpa's control. His commanders, Atac and Quisquis, led a well-trained army southward, aiming to cut off Atahualpa's supply lines and force him into submission. But Atahualpa was ready. He had spent years strengthening his position in Quito, and his generals, Chalcuchimac and Quisquis, had built a loyal and disciplined force. The first major confrontation took place near the city of Tumebamba, a strategic stronghold in the north. Huáscar's forces, confident in their superiority, launched a direct assault on the city, hoping to crush Atahualpa's resistance before it could gain momentum. However, the defenders fought fiercely, using the mountainous terrain to their advantage. The battle raged for days, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Eventually, Atahualpa's forces managed to drive Huáscar's army back, securing a crucial early victory. This defeat sent shockwaves through Cusco. Huáscar, enraged by the loss, ordered his commanders to regroup and strike again. Meanwhile, Atahualpa saw an opportunity to take the initiative. He began a series of calculated campaigns, pushing southward into key provinces. His forces moved swiftly, capturing important cities and cutting off Huáscar's access to vital resources. With each victory, Atahualpa's confidence grew, and his army swelled with new recruits from the provinces that had once been loyal to Huayna Capac. As the war escalated, the empire was torn in two. In Cusco, Huáscar struggled to maintain control, facing growing dissent from nobles who questioned his leadership. In the north, Atahualpa consolidated his power, presenting himself as the rightful ruler destined to lead the empire forward. The conflict was no longer just a struggle for the throne, but a battle for the very soul of the Inca Empire. As the war raged on, both brothers sought to outmaneuver each other, forging alliances and turning former allies into enemies. Huáscar, struggling to maintain control over the empire's heartland, faced increasing resistance from regional leaders who saw Atahualpa's growing strength as an opportunity. Some provinces that had once pledged loyalty to Cusco began to shift their support, sending supplies and warriors to Atahualpa's cause. Even within Huáscar's own court, doubts grew. Nobles who had once backed him now questioned his ability to win the war, whispering of possible betrayals. Atahualpa, sensing Huáscar's weakening grip, launched a bold campaign to seize key cities along the empire's central spine. His generals, Chalcuchimac and Quisquis, led brutal assaults on strategic strongholds, cutting off Huáscar's access to vital resources. One of the most decisive moments came when Atahualpa's forces captured Cajamarca, a critical city that controlled trade routes between the highlands and the coast. With this victory, Atahualpa gained control of a major supply line, further isolating Huáscar in Cusco. Meanwhile, in the capital, Huáscar's desperation grew. He ordered his commanders to strike back with greater force, leading to a series of bloody battles in the central provinces. However, his forces were increasingly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. In a desperate attempt to regain the upper hand, Huáscar turned to diplomacy, sending envoys to distant provinces, offering land and titles in exchange for military support. Some answered his call, but others hesitated, unwilling to risk their forces in a war that seemed to be slipping from Huáscar's grasp.
The tide of the war shifted dramatically when a crucial betrayal struck at the heart of Huáscar's defenses. A high-ranking general, once loyal to him, defected to Atahualpa's side, bringing with him vital intelligence about Huáscar's troop movements. With this information, Atahualpa's forces ambushed a key supply convoy, crippling Huáscar's ability to sustain his army. The loss of supplies and morale sent Huáscar's forces into disarray, and soon the road to Cusco lay open for Atahualpa's final push. With Huáscar's forces in disarray, Atahualpa seized the moment to launch his final campaign. His armies, now bolstered by defectors and fresh recruits, marched southward with relentless determination. The once unshakable walls of Cusco, the sacred heart of the empire, now faced an enemy at its gates. Huáscar, desperate to defend his capital, rallied his remaining troops for a last stand. But his forces were exhausted, his allies wavering, and his cause slipping away. The decisive battle took place near the city of Cusco itself. Huáscar, knowing the stakes, personally led his soldiers into combat, hoping to inspire them with his presence. Atahualpa, ever the strategist, had planned his approach carefully. His generals, Chalcuchimac and Quisquis, led the charge using superior numbers and better coordination to break through Huáscar's defenses. The streets of Cusco ran red with blood as the two armies clashed in brutal house-to-house fighting. Despite Huáscar's fierce resistance, his forces could not withstand the onslaught. As the battle turned against him, he fled into the city's palace, hoping to make a final stand. But it was in vain. Atahualpa's soldiers stormed the palace, capturing Huáscar and ending the war. The once proud heir to the throne was dragged before his victorious brother, forced to witness the fall of the city he had fought to protect. With Cusco in his grasp, Atahualpa declared himself the sole ruler of the Inca Empire. But his victory was bittersweet. The war had left the empire in ruins, its roads and bridges damaged, its cities scarred by battle, and its people divided. The once unified realm was now a land of weary soldiers and grieving families, its golden age overshadowed by the wounds of civil war. Yet even as Atahualpa celebrated his triumph, a new threat loomed on the horizon. Unknown to him, foreign invaders were approaching from the east, men with strange weapons and even stranger intentions. The war between brothers had left the empire weakened, and now a far greater danger was about to arrive. Even as Atahualpa consolidated his rule over the war-torn empire, a force unlike any the Incas had ever faced was drawing closer. Spanish explorers, driven by tales of untold riches and the promise of conquest, had been making their way through the Americas for decades. Now they had set their sights on the Andes. Francisco Pizarro, a seasoned conquistador, had already launched several expeditions along the Peruvian coast, gathering intelligence and testing the strength of the native forces. But it was not until news of the Inca Civil War reached him that he saw his opportunity. The war between Huáscar and Atahualpa had left the empire weakened. The once unified military was now divided, its resources drained, and its leadership in disarray. The roads that had once connected the vast empire were in disrepair. Communication between provinces had broken down, and many regions were still recovering from the devastation of battle. The people, too, were weary. Some had suffered under the heavy demands of war, while others had lost faith in the ruling elite. It was into this fractured landscape that the Spanish would step. Pizarro, aware of the empire's weakened state, moved swiftly. He gathered a small but well-armed force, just over 150 men, armed with steel weapons, horses, and firearms. These weapons, unknown to the Incas, would prove devastating in battle. Unlike the native warriors who relied on wooden clubs, slings, and bronze-tipped spears, the Spanish had technology that could turn the tide of war in an instant. More importantly, they had experience in conquering vast empires with minimal forces, as had been seen in Mexico with the fall of the Aztecs. But it was not just military strength that would give the Spanish an advantage. They also understood the value of exploiting internal divisions. The Inca Empire, still reeling from the Civil War, was far from united. Many regional leaders, resentful of Cusco's rule, saw the Spanish not as invaders but as potential allies. Some even welcomed them, hoping to use the newcomers to settle old grudges or gain independence from the central government. The Spanish, recognizing this, would use diplomacy as skillfully as they used force. Atahualpa, fresh from his victory over Huáscar, was determined to restore order to the empire. He summoned his generals and nobles to Cajamarca, a city in the highland where he planned to solidify his rule and prepare for the challenges ahead. However, he had underestimated the threat posed by the Spanish. Francisco Pizarro, having learned of Atahualpa's location, saw an opportunity to strike. With a small force of just over 150 men, he marched toward Cajamarca, setting the stage for one of the most decisive moments in history.
On November 16, 1532, Atahualpa arrived in Cajamarca with tens of thousands of warriors. He had no intention of engaging in battle. Instead, he sought to meet with Pizarro and assess the foreign invaders. The Spanish, however, had other plans. As Atahualpa entered the city's main plaza, surrounded by his unarmed attendants, Pizarro gave the signal. A sudden volley of gunfire shattered the air, and Spanish cavalry charged into the stunned Inca ranks. The element of surprise, combined with the terrifying noise of firearms and the speed of the horses, threw the Inca forces into chaos. In the midst of the confusion, Spanish soldiers rushed forward and seized Atahualpa himself. The Sapa Inca, the divine ruler of the greatest empire in the Americas, was captured in an instant. His warriors, leaderless and overwhelmed, fled or were cut down. The massacre that followed was swift and brutal. Thousands of Inca nobles and soldiers died, while the Spanish suffered minimal losses. The once mighty empire had been dealt a crippling blow. With Atahualpa in their grasp, the Spanish held him for months, demanding a ransom in gold and silver. The Incas, desperate to save their ruler, filled a room with treasures from across the empire. Yet, even after fulfilling the ransom, Atahualpa was not released. Instead, the Spanish falsely accused him of plotting against them and executed him in July 1533. His death marked the symbolic end of the Inca Empire. Without a strong ruler to unify them, the empire crumbled, opening the door for Spanish conquest. With Atahualpa dead and Huáscar already executed, the Inca Empire had no clear ruler. The Spanish, seizing the opportunity, installed a puppet emperor, Tupac Hualpa, a relative of Huayna Capac. However, his rule was short-lived. He died within months, likely from illness, leaving the Spanish to place another puppet, Manco Inca Yupanqui, on the throne. Though Manco initially cooperated with the invaders, he soon realized that the Spanish had no intention of allowing Inca rule to continue. In 1536, he led a massive rebellion, attempting to drive the foreigners from his homeland. Manco's uprising was fierce and widespread. He gathered thousands of warriors and launched a siege on Cusco, the heart of the empire. The Spanish, though outnumbered, used their superior weapons and tactics to hold the city. After months of brutal fighting, Manco was forced to retreat into the mountains, where he established a stronghold in Vilcabamba. From there, he and his successors waged a decades-long resistance against Spanish rule. However, the empire, as it had once been, was gone. The centralized government had collapsed, and the once unified provinces now acted independently, some even siding with the Spanish in hopes of securing power for themselves. The civil war between Huáscar and Atahualpa had left the empire fractured and vulnerable. The Spanish, recognizing these divisions, exploited them to their advantage. They formed alliances with rival factions, turning former enemies of Cusco against the imperial rulers. Some native leaders saw the Spanish as a means to break free from Inca dominance, while others sought to use the newcomers as tools in their own struggles for power. The result was a slow but inevitable dismantling of the Inca state. By the 1570s, the last remnants of independent Inca rule were crushed. Vilcabamba fell to the Spanish in 1572, and the final Sapa Inca, Tupac Amaru, was captured and executed. The empire that had once stretched across thousands of miles was now a colony of Spain, its people subjected to foreign rule. The war between brothers had not only cost the lives of millions, but had also paved the way for the destruction of one of the greatest civilizations in the Americas. The war between Huáscar and Atahualpa did more than decide who would sit on the Inca throne. It reshaped the fate of an entire civilization. The Civil War weakened the Inca military, fractured its political unity, and drained its resources, leaving it vulnerable to foreign conquest. When the Spanish arrived, they found a land already torn apart by internal conflict, making their task of domination much easier than it might have been under a strong, unified ruler. The consequences of this division extended beyond the battlefield, shaping the lives of the Inca people for generations to come. One of the most immediate effects of the succession crisis was the collapse of centralized authority. The Inca Empire had been built on a rigid system of governance, with the Sapa Inca at the top,
overseeing a network of provincial rulers and administrators. When Atahualpa was captured and executed, this system crumbled. Without a strong leader to command loyalty, local rulers began to act independently, some even welcoming the Spanish as a means to secure their own power. The unity that once defined the empire vanished, replaced by a patchwork of competing factions. The social fabric of Inca society also unraveled. The empire had been held together by a complex system of tribute, labor, and religious devotion. With the central government in disarray, many communities were left to fend for themselves. The Spanish, recognizing the opportunity, imposed their own rule, dismantling traditional structures and replacing them with colonial institutions. Forced labor, new taxes, and the introduction of European diseases devastated the population, leading to a sharp decline in the number of Inca people.
Yet, despite the empire's fall, its legacy endured. The descendants of the Incas continued to resist Spanish rule for decades, preserving their language, traditions, and knowledge. Even today, the Quechua people, direct descendants of the Inca, keep alive the customs of their ancestors. The ruins of Machu Picchu, Cusco, and countless other sites stand as silent witnesses to the grandeur of a civilization that once ruled the Andes. Though the war between brothers led to the empire's downfall, its story remains a testament to human ambition, resilience, and the enduring power of history. While the war between Huáscar and Atahualpa is often told as a tale of two brothers fighting for power, the reality was far more complex. One lesser-known fact is that the conflict was not solely about personal ambition, it was also a struggle between two very different visions for the empire. Huáscar, raised in Cusco, represented the traditional Inca elite, deeply rooted in religious and ceremonial practices. His rule would have emphasized the sacred role of the Sapa Inca, maintaining the customs that had bound the empire together for generations. Atahualpa, on the other hand, had spent much of his life in the northern provinces, where he had been exposed to different cultures and governance styles. His leadership was more pragmatic, focused on military efficiency and administrative reforms. This ideological divide played a crucial role in shaping the war and its outcome. Another overlooked aspect of the crisis was the role of regional leaders in fueling the conflict. Many of the empire's provincial governors had grown powerful in their own right, and some saw the succession struggle as an opportunity to assert their independence. Some supported Huáscar in the hopes of curbing the growing influence of the northern provinces, while others backed Atahualpa, believing he would grant them greater autonomy. These shifting alliances turned the war into a broader contest for control, not just of the throne, but of the empire's very structure. Perhaps the most surprising fact is that the war may have been avoidable. Some records suggest that Huayna Capac had in fact named a successor before his death, his younger son Atahualpa. However, this decision was either not widely accepted or deliberately ignored by the Cusco elite, who favored Huáscar due to his noble birth. This ambiguity in the line of succession created the perfect storm for civil war, proving that the fate of an empire could be decided not just by swords, but by the uncertainty of a ruler's final words. The story of the Inca succession crisis is more than a tale of war and conquest. It is a lesson in the dangers of division, the consequences of leadership disputes, and the fragility of even the most powerful empires. The Inca Empire, once a beacon of organization and strength, fell not because of an external enemy alone, but because of internal strife that left it vulnerable. The conflict between Huáscar and Atahualpa was not just a struggle for power, it was a failure of governance, a breakdown of unity that allowed a small force of foreign invaders to bring down an entire civilization. For modern leaders, this history serves as a warning.
A nation or organization that cannot resolve internal disputes risks weakening itself from within. The Inca Empire had the tools to prevent such a crisis: strong traditions, a centralized government, and a well-organized military. Yet when faced with a leadership vacuum, those very strengths became liabilities. Without a clear system for succession, the empire's stability crumbled, and its enemies seized the opportunity to strike. Moreover, the crisis highlights the importance of adaptability. The Spanish did not win solely through superior weapons. They won because they understood how to exploit weakness. They recognized the divisions within the Inca world and used them to their advantage. This remains a timeless truth. Those who can navigate internal conflicts and maintain unity are far more likely to withstand external threats. The legacy of the Inca succession crisis is not just one of loss, but also of resilience. Though the empire fell, their people endured. Their traditions, language, and spirit survived despite centuries of colonization. Their story reminds us that while empires may rise and fall, the strength of a people lies in their ability to remember, to rebuild, and to carry forward the lessons of the past. Though the Inca Empire fell centuries ago, its story is far from over. The ruins of Cusco, the towering peaks of Machu Picchu, and the winding roads that once connected a vast civilization all stand as silent witnesses to a world that once thrived. The war between Huáscar and Atahualpa was not just a battle for a throne, it was a turning point in history, a moment that reshaped the fate of an entire continent. Today, the descendants of the Inca still walk the same lands, speak the same language, and preserve the traditions of their ancestors. Their resilience is a testament to the strength of a people who endured conquest, colonization, and centuries of change. The Andes, once the heart of an empire, remain a place of mystery, wonder, and cultural richness. The story of the Inca is not just one of loss, but also of survival, of a civilization that continues to inspire. As we look back on the events that led to the empire's fall, we are reminded of the fragility of power and the enduring impact of history. The choices made by rulers, the divisions that weaken nations, and the forces that shape the fate of civilizations are lessons that remain relevant today. The Inca succession crisis was a tragedy, but it was also a chapter in a much larger story that continues to unfold in the mountains, the valleys, and the hearts of those who remember.